First Kings chapter 22, at the end of it, it turns its eyes southward to the kingdom of Judah. Now, it's important to recognize that when Kings was written, it was written as a continuous book. First and Second Kings was just one book of Kings. So this isn't really like a conclusion point. It's just a where the scroll either was broken up or and sometimes passed. But it's continuing the narrative in the Second Kings. So we're going to really just kind of stop with Jehoshaphat and pick up Ahaziah in the next time we go through Kings and next summer. But we're turning southward again to the kingdom of Judah, and we're looking a little bit more in depth at Jehoshaphat. Now, we get very little information on Jehoshaphat, so I've included in your curriculum some background information on Jehoshaphat from Chronicles. And I think we just learn a little bit about Jehoshaphat. I mean, I think Jehoshaphat's a very relatable character. He was someone who was trying to do what was right. He did, overall, he's viewed as a favorable king. He actually gets a better report than his father Asa did. And but he made some mistakes along the way. We saw him last week go in league with Ahab. He said, inquire of the word of the Lord, but he really didn't listen to the word of the Lord because he went to battle anyways. And we see him have a continued kind of problem with maybe having some bad company. And we see some of that. But I think there's some things that we can learn from Jehoshaphat just learn how God interacts with those who are faithful towards him. To those who believe that Jesus Christ died for their sins, was buried, bearing the curse of death, and rose again from the grave in victory over sin and death. And he's going to return again because he's ascended to be with the Father. He's reigning over his kingdom through his Spirit who indwells his church on earth. And he's going to return to gather them to himself so that they may be forever in the presence of God in the new heaven and new earth. So in our context, the faithful are those who believe in that message, who've turned from their sins and begin to follow after Christ in faith, to live by faith. So we can learn, though, a lot from that, is that Hebrews talks about those who live by faith, they look to Jesus, but those who also they're sons of God, and if they're sons of God, that means they're going to be disciplined. And I think that's what we see here. I'm just going to kind of highlight those 2 points that I talk about Jehoshaphat and ourselves, is that we are corruptible. We are a new creation in Christ. The old is gone and the new has come. But we are now enfleshed in these things that are waging war. Our spirit is alive, but our flesh is still decaying. So outwardly we're wasting away, but inwardly we're being renewed day by day. So we got this war that's happening. There's these passions in our flesh that's waging war against our soul. We're sojourners, we're exiles. We are longing to be with Christ, for that is better. To die is gain. Yet even in death, we are awaiting for death, the separation of the body and the soul. We're waiting for death to finally be defeated at Christ's return so that body and soul will be reunited. But until then, we are still in this battle of corruption that's with our flesh. Now, thankfully, there's therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. But it's good to know that. A lot of times people go, well, Jesus ate with sinners, so we need to spend time with sinners. And there's absolutely right. But there's a difference between deep engagement of sinners and intentional engagement of sinners. Jesus was intentional in the way that he engaged sinners, but he was not deep. And what I mean by that is that his relationships were within a collect few of people who were believers in Christ, of course, except for Judas, who was predestined to betray Christ. And we need to recognize that in and of ourselves, that our relationships need to be intentional with the lost, yet our deep relationships, our business partners, our marriages, our friends, our close friends, they need to be with other believers, specifically, and in a real way, specifically the believers that are at Meadowbrook. We have covenanted with one another to be members of the same church together. So, but we just need to recognize that we are corruptible, and we need to pursue the community of God. And then we need to recognize that we are foolish. We often choose the lowest level of learning, which is learning by experience, learning from our mistakes. It's wise to learn from our mistakes. I mean, that's more wise than not learning from your mistakes. But it's even better, it's more wise if we learn from the scriptures without actually having to make the mistake. It's a very foolish thing for someone to just want to go and make the mistake so they can learn from experience. Now, it's wise to learn from those mistakes when they happen, but it's even wiser to learn from the scriptures and from the mistakes of others without actually having to make those mistakes ourselves. Jehoshaphat, he was corruptible. he was faithful and he pursued the Lord. He grew from his mistakes, but we can learn from him is that we need Christ. He's the image that we're being conformed into, and that we need to rely on his wisdom, the wisdom of his word. And we can learn from that without actually having to learn from experience, if possible. But we need to learn from our mistakes. It took Jehoshaphat a couple times. Hopefully it doesn't take us that many times.